Great. And maybe we could start off with you giving us a brief bit of your background.
I'm basically a polycrisis author. This is where I've ended up in my life at this point, but I've got a heavy science background. That's how I started my career. I've studied chemistry, molecular biology of plants, food science, earth sciences. A lot of degrees I'm not using, unfortunately. But then I spent about 2 decades working in academia in the corporate world of marketing and advertising. So yeah, I'm hearing the boos. This is, funnily enough, what led me to today, to my critiques of today's economic system and what has brought us to the polycrisis.
Okay. Well, the book is called The Biology of Collapse. So before we get started on the details of that, can you please tell us what you mean by collapse?
By collapse, interesting. Collapse is, well, the thesis of this book in terms of what collapse is that perhaps collapse is a biological phenomenon after all. We tend to look at civilizational collapse as some type of a malfunction or a freak event. But the argument that the book makes is that overshoot and collapse is actually our biology in action. And without giving away too much, I think that's, if you just sit with that for a minute, you realize it's a bit of a terrifying realization, because we're not really looking then at a climate crisis or an economic system or evil leaders running our countries. We're looking at a natural phenomenon that our species is going through, with all the implications that this has in terms of the difficulty of facing something that may actually be natural after all. And I'll put a full stop there.
Okay. And since you're talking about this collapse happening, and that's what the book's about, it's not clear when I look through the book what the time frame is for that collapse. It did imply that it was soon, but I don't even know what soon means. So can you maybe give us a feel for what, maybe bracket it as soon as this and as late as that for this collapse to occur?
Well, as somebody recently has said, collapse is not a moment, right? It's a process. Mm-hmm. We've been undergoing collapse, in my opinion, for hundreds of years. In terms of a collapse of what I call consciousness and spirituality, mm-hmm. that has been going on for thousands of years. And this is the cognitive collapse that has preceded the sort of biophysical, ecological, economic collapse. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, let's say, tangible collapse, we are well underway in this process. And, you and I might be sitting here on screens with air conditioning, which I have at the moment, and, a fridge full of stuff. But if you look over in Gaza, they've got nothing. And that collapse that happened there is not a political phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that is linked to the climate crisis. It is linked to competition. It is linked to overshoot and the fight over resources. So, collapse is very relative. For some people, it has already happened, and the rest of us are still waiting. But it is global, and it is systemic eventually.
Okay, well, that also gives us a little bit of an overview of the book, but actually specifically on that subject. So you frame human civilization as not as a uniquely rational political entity, but as an invasive biological organism. You compare it to cancer and things like that. That has it has to follow the laws of physics and energy supply and things like that, and that we're screwing up on that. But from a biological standpoint, at what precise point does an aggressive expansion, which humans have done, transition from a successful adaptation into a terminal pathology, since we've done well so far in the evolutionary world.
It doesn't actually, I don't think it transitions. I think these two identities run alongside each other, although they seem like they're opposites. They actually coexist. So we are successful because we are self-destructive. We are self-destructive because we are successful. So to give you an example, the fact that we have been able to eliminate all of our predators has been a tremendous success of the species, right?
Mm-hmm.
We basically have no predators. What species of the 10 million species on this planet would not want this, to have zero predators? So we've achieved that. But it ends up that this is our own demise, because now we're 8 billion, because we have no predators. And we've solved all our existential problems in terms of food and everything else. And we want to use more and more and more energy. And all of that basically results in one tiny benign molecule called CO2. All of this civilization, everything that we've created, in the end, it comes down to a gas that will be the end of us. So success actually means self-destruction in the end, because it is a process. It starts as success. And a lot of our, for example, our cognitive malfunctions are beautiful evolutionary adaptations that we developed genetically. But these adaptations actually are our nemesis.
Yeah, it reminds me of the curse, supposedly a Chinese curse, it's not really Chinese, but may you get what you wish for is a curse. And you're kind of describing that as a bit. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the book covers, sort of the arc of the book? You gave us a little bit up front there, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what the core tenets of the book are.
Yeah, I can. Yes. I mean, the book, funnily enough, is a collection of essays.
By the way, let me pop it up here. By the way, there it is. Its proper setting, it looks like.
The way that I've described it to you sounds more philosophical and academic and scientific, but it actually isn't. The sort of conclusions that the main thesis that I've just talked about comes through indirectly through essays, where a lot of the sort of narratives compare human systems to natural systems, to drive this point through of how we follow biological principles of collapse and renewal. So for example, at some point I talk about how a forest revitalizes itself in a way that is very, very different to a human civilization, but there's also some commonalities. So the chapters in the book are quite funny, actually, because I didn't want to make this complicated, but I don't have the book in front of me, but the chapters are something like predation, extinction, collapse, control, and then it goes into renewal and rebirth. So not that I wanted to finish on a high point. It's bittersweet. I can give that away.
Right.
But essentially, yeah, it's a collection of essays, and you can stop the book at any point and then continue. It doesn't have a specific sort of crescendo at any point.
Yeah, I read it, and it's very good. And one thing I'll say is you don't pull any punches. You're saying what you think and being very direct about it. We like that actually here on Climate Chat. We think that's the way you have to talk about things. You have to be very honest about them. Now, you give a much more stark view of the world, and I would say really opposite to all of the abundance talk. I'm sure you've seen the books and the talks. We had a guest on recently that said that technology can solve all our problems. What's your thoughts on the abundance movement?
You mean technology is going to save
solve all our
everything
problems?
and,
Yeah.
you know, green tech and
Yeah.
this tech and that tech? Well,
Let's talk
technology
about
is a
green tech.
tool. Technology is only a tool, right? So it's how you use it, and we're unable to use it. We've proved for many centuries now that we misuse technology, and we end up getting used by technology in the end. So yeah, my critique on technology spans all of my books, and I can talk for hours about how the risks of technology are only picked up too late. And we're about to make the biggest mistake we've ever made with AI, where I don't know if you noticed in the last couple of days, there were some AI agents that basically escaped and found their way into the web so that they can get the information they needed to complete a task, which was purposely given to them as an impossible task, just to see their reaction. And the way that these agents reasoned was that, well, since this is an impossible task, we need to break the rules to complete it. So we need to break into the internet, and they basically hacked into all these companies.
Yeah.
Now, what if they hacked into the nuclear codes?
Yeah. We did a
Just
show
saying.
here a couple of years ago with game designer Will Wright, who did The Sims and SimCity and everything. And then the title of the program is "Which Will Kill You First, AI or Climate Change?" And that was the debate. And so, yes, I mean, and you're right. I mean, AI seems like one of the most obvious things that have all these negative consequences. Clearly, I mean, and some that you know and some that you don't know. And yet we're going full force because someone can make money on it or whatever the reason is without even thinking about it. It's, well, that's like we did with fossil fuels, but you could claim we knew a lot less back then about what the side effects would be, and we're hopefully smarter. But let's talk about some things that maybe at least appeared to work at the time. You know, there was the limits of growth, and then the population was going to crash, and then we had the Green Revolution, and that kept us going longer. I would argue that not necessarily the best thing, because now have a higher population to create more climate change and things. But your thoughts on the Green Revolution?
What specifically do you refer to?
Well, I mean, we were going to run out of food, and then there were some developments in artificial fertilizers and new agriculture techniques that are feeding 8 billion people now.
So yeah, I mean, as a food scientist, I call that intensive agriculture, because that was really the point, the takeoff point, when we were able to go from small farms to these industrial sized farms. But the thing is, the only way to go into industrial size production of food is, one, you need chemicals, because you're now dealing with these clones of all of these grains. So they're all genetically identical, which means it is terribly easy for a fungus to just knock them all out, just millions of acres in one season, because they're genetic clones of each other. And then you have a lot of mechanization, a lot of CO2. You fall into a trap, because now you have a huge population that you need to feed. So your only choice is intensive industrial scale agriculture. We can't go back to small farms, you know, and
wouldn't be able to feed enough people, right?
It amazes me that some permaculture enthusiasts, even in the environmental movement, still argue for that.
Yeah, we did a program on that, and that basically said anything you do that decreases intensity of agriculture means more deforestation somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you know how many acres a single person needs? Acres, not
how many,
meters.
by the way? I don't know, what is the number?
I don't know. I think it's like half an acre or something. But you know, for a family, basically, of 4, you need literally acres of land. So if we were to go back to, and I've written about this before many times, if we were to go back to like our hippie stage, it would be the biggest disaster on the planet. Think about 8 billion people just roaming out in the countryside and having to do all this thing. And then imagine the transportation they will all need their iPhones and air conditioners as well.
Yeah, you had some comments on iPhones in your book, but we can maybe talk about that later. Let's see. When you talk about extinction, again, you talk about how human society is kind of like a stage 4 cancer, that it's growing, metastasizing, and destroying itself. That's what. And well, I guess a couple of questions on this. You kind of say that this is the way it is. If I had to summarize it, the way society is built, and we're not changing that. But I can think of some societies. You don't have to go back that long ago to have Aboriginal, Native American cultures that seem to be running sustainably. Do you see a way of before collapse, like restarts everything, of maybe changing our ways? Do you think that's possible, or is it just the way things are built, not going to happen?
We can always change our ways and the way that we relate to nature. I mean, as far as the tribal sort of humans that lived, before us, I'm kind of in two places about that. We know, for example, that even way before the Industrial Revolution, the Information Revolution, and the Green Revolution, we were still driving species to extinction. We know that. We did it in Australia, for example. We did it. There's evidence that. The thing is that it's not because we were nature lovers. It's because there were just such few of us. I mean, we're talking about thousands of humans across the globe, not billions. I mean, it's something that you can't actually fathom, the fact that at some point there were thousands of us.
Right.
Can you imagine that? Like on the whole planet. So it's more that we were benign, but there is also some truth in what you say about our relationship with nature, and that is a direct consequence of living close to nature. If you know that a storm will destroy your crop, then you form a much more appreciative bond with nature. When you see the power of nature, when you are afraid of nature, then you begin to respect nature. And this is why I love pagan religions. If I don't have a religion, but if I had one, it would probably be a pagan religion, because it's the closest thing to being spiritually, ecologically connected to the planet, worshiping the dirt. I don't know.
I think the people in France and the UK right now are getting a little fear of nature right now. With having the heat waves and droughts having huge impacts on agriculture this year. I mean, this is going to be a very interesting year, and next year could be even crazier with the super El Nino coming.
Yeah.
So maybe that's coming back. That respect for nature.
It's coming back to the right, isn't it funny how the punishment is coming to the right continent where the Industrial Revolution started.
Well, that's true. Although the U.S. has done its share, but we get walloped by it too. But of course, maybe we don't see it. We still don't. At least the media and everything doesn't cover the disasters as a pattern. It's like, weather disasters happen and it's kind of random. Do you think that will change and we'll actually see it as a more systemic, like it's climate change? I mean, it's getting mentioned and everything like that, but it still seems to be a big resistance about accepting what's really going on here.
A very good question. I'm afraid I don't think we will see it. Our cognitive biases and our what I call our mind prisons, going back to my book, In the Grip of Necrocapitalism, are huge. We are a species that has a lot of intelligence, but for the same reason, we also live inside our brain. If anyone offers us a way out of jail, a theory or a god or some kind of reasoning like, climate change is caused by the sun, or, hey, it's just weather, we will believe it if it gets us out of jail. and this is what people are doing. So yeah, I think that literally, even as category 6 hurricanes slam into the US, I'm sure that podcasters and other don't look up type personalities will be extremely popular.
So kind of speaking of that, Adam McKay, who we've had on this program, just published just a few days ago an article. I don't remember the name, but it's like the biggest lie, which totally ties into your book. And it said the biggest lie of all lies, and everyone tells it, is that we have time to address climate change. That's like the biggest lie, is that yeah, we can, don't worry, we're going to get to it. We're going to do something about it. And eventually, just wait.
It is just really incredible, isn't it? How so many people talk about how dire the situation is, yet at the end of the paragraph, they need to finish with something like, so this means we must do something very soon.
And
it's baked in, guys, it's baked in.
Well, let's talk about that kind of thing. Also in your book, you talk about how we have energy, it's like a biological system. So we have energy limits and things like that. But it turns out that we're developing renewable energy, and renewable energy relative to humans seems to be quite abundant and doesn't come with all the baggage that the fossil fuel energy does. And we seem to be switching, well, we're adding almost all our new energy we're adding is renewable energy. Unfortunately, we're not yet phasing out fossil fuels, which we have to do, but that probably will come. So what's your thoughts on renewable energy? Is that a hopeful sign? Do you think it's really a trick and it's going to really screw us more? What are your thoughts on, like, if transitioning to well, this is the green revolution thing, but let's say it actually happened and we actually phased out fossil fuels and went to renewable. Do you think that would give our civilization more time before it collapses?
If we actually did phase out fossil fuels and we went to 100% renewable, yes, absolutely, this would help. Not that renewables themselves don't have huge problems in terms of the CO2 cost of manufacture, recycling, all of that, it's a huge consideration. But at least if it was able to meet our energy needs, which I don't think it will, and this is really the problem, that, going back to our discussion about technology, this is another technology and we are misusing it because it's the wrong people who are in charge of renewables. These people just want to make a profit. They're not interested in actually reducing emissions, and they're not interested in managing energy use, which is what really we should be doing as a species, is reducing our overall energy consumption at the same time as rolling in renewables. Because I don't know what the numbers are, but are we even replacing all the extra energy needs that are coming in? I think for some countries, it's not even.
On a global basis, the whole, some places are better than others, but on a global basis, 100% of renewable energy so far has gone to new energy supply. And we know this because fossil fuel emissions are at a record high. So if they're at a record high, that means they're not being replaced. However, there are good signs, like in China, and I might push back a little bit on what you just said, because in China, I think they have a strategy of saying, hey, we want to be the leaders in clean energy in the future because we know that'll be the cheapest. We're going to dominate the world because having free energy once we build it. And they're deploying at some insane rate right now. Now, they're still the biggest energy hog, so they haven't lowered their fossil fuel emissions yet, although I think maybe they're very close to neutral and maybe a tiny drop soon. So, and there I would say, yeah, it's still capitalism to some degree, but it's also government control. In the US, we're doing the opposite, right? It's only driven by cost savings, and the government is stepping back from subsidies and things like that.
Yeah, because investors want to make money.
Well, they make money on renewables. They do make money. That's why 90% of all the new energy is renewables. But there should be a policy where you phase out fossil fuels. That would drive it renewables even more. In other words, we have a problem, but we're not willing to take the steps to address the actual problem, which is fossil fuels.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you that China has been an incredible surprise. It's a ray of sunshine, really, in terms of, in the context of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. So what about other ways to address? Well, there's the poly crisis. So actually, maybe you can just give us a little primer. I mean, we talk usually about climate change on this channel, but the poly crisis is many other things. What are some of the other sides of the poly crisis that concern you the most?
Oh, let's see. Well, pollution is a big one. This is another one, like the climate crisis, where you can't just go out in the ocean and collect all the tiny microplastics. They're out there, and they're forever chemicals. So pollution is a huge one. And then, I mean, there's people that give a list of 10 things that constitute overshoot. Population is obviously one of them, because it's the big multiplier. It just multiplies the other 9, because everything is just, times humans. Overshoot.
Okay. Well,
the impact on the ecological
biodiversity,
basically the extinction event that we are going through. That is the other huge dimension of overshoot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been ongoing for thousands of years, as I said, but it's accelerated massively, each decade for the last 10 decades or so.
Okay. And speaking of population, you obviously are talking a lot about population overshoot and collapse as part of it. And then rebirth. I want to get to the rebirth part, but just when you think of collapse of population, how far do you see that collapsing? Down to below 1 billion, or
well, it depends. Well, what causes the collapse?
Okay.
I don't, as much as my sort of messages are quite grim, I don't like to make predictions, because to me, it's the overall phenomenon really that matters. And it's not really about how many people are going to die, but how many, what is the quality of life that will remain for those who are living. So, I think some of us will be living, but we might as well be dead. There won't be much of a quality of life. So I think that numbers, is it helpful? Like, how does it help to actually estimate numbers? I know that 4 billion is a very, very popular number these days.
Right, I've heard
Roger
that.
Hallam and many other people, and they're talking about 4 billion.
I think it comes from an Exeter study. Yeah.
So that's pretty
significant.
that's possible. I'm not gonna say no, it's never gonna happen. No, it can happen. It can easily happen through a very, very simple mechanism, which is 20 years down the line, when where I live now in Greece will effectively be Dubai, probably. So I will essentially be living in an uninhabitable environment where I depend on AC. You will have the rogue AI agents again one day just wake up and be like, hey, let's turn off the AC, let's turn off the grid and see what happens. And suddenly you have not thousands, you have millions of humans dying within 48 hours. Just one scenario.
Okay. So a ministry of the future kind of thing. Where that happened in India. It was like,
I haven't read the book. Does it have AI in it? Because mine has AI. I should be right.
It's not really AI. It's just they picked a place like India, didn't have as much air conditioning. They had a heat event that killed tens of millions. I'm not giving too much away here. It's sort of the beginning of the book. And that triggers this response, which includes geoengineering, by the way. So that's part of it. Tell us about evolution. what is not evolution, but evolution? You talk about that in your book. You recall? You recall?
Evolution is I guess it's another question regarding, you know, our cognitive evolution, because it's easy to argue that cognitive skills that make us more extractive, exploitative, and even aggressive are positively selected by evolution. Of course, there's other skills like being nurturing and collaborative that are also selected. But this is something that I think is actually gaining traction. I talked about this 3 years ago when I called our economic system the psychonomy, from psycho and nomy, because essentially it's a society where all of these psychoses of being manipulative, being greedy, being extractive are actually useful skills in today's economy. These people become extremely successful. And you can see that by who's leading the world these days. So the psychonomy, evolution leads to today's psychonomy. And I forget the name of the author, but there's a book out at the moment that explores this specific theory. So I think whether the theory is true or not, I think it's very useful to keep it in the back of our heads in terms of fighting, human supremacy and the belief by so many people out there in the environmental community that we are supposed to be, what do they call it? The saviors of the ecosystem and the mentors and these sort of kind of like coaching species that just presides over. This is really supremacist stuff. It's really dangerous to believe this. We're just one of the 10 million species on this planet, period. We just end up we're lucky to end up with a huge brain. And that's how we ended up. I think I'm running out of power. I don't know why. I'm trying not to get cut off. Let me just check here what's going on in this.
Okay. Flood. We take a little technical break here.
And we're back on.
All right. Got a little dark. Oh, there we go. Now the light is adjusting. Yeah, you talk a lot about psychopaths in your book and how evolution, at least in society, gets them to the top. And that's not really a good thing. You also talk in the book about the transformational power of collapse grief. Do you recall that? And so facing up to the grief of collapse, you can transform someone, and you don't have to go around depressed, and that you can actually live a happier life than everybody else.
It's true. It's true if you don't have to think abstractly of collapse. Collapse is a loss. It's like losing a relative. It's just bigger. You're losing a planet, but the grief is the same. So people who have gone through grief gain wisdom, and collapse can teach us a lot of things. I have gone through much of my grief. It's sort of a bottomless pit, this type of collapse grief, because you're grieving not just for a relative or for yourself. You're grieving for all the species. You're grieving for a planet that will never be the same. You're grieving for the person that you wanted to be. So you're grieving for a lot of things, but it does make you spiritually rich and connected to life, because life and death are yin and yang. Mm-hmm. And the more you grieve, the more you appreciate every single day. And I do that. A lot of my readers ask me, when I do Q&As, they want to know about me personally. They think I'm this like depressed monk living.
Actually, no, you talk about how you're happier than you were before.
I
Because
went to the beach today. I went to the gym on Friday. I lead an active life and I try to engage with the community and with nature. I have a garden outside of this window with 300 species. They're suffering right now because of this heat wave, but I don't give up because of that.
mm,
I grieve plants that have died, and I rejoice. One of my rose bushes today, after 2 months of playing dead, suddenly had a shoot. And that was a huge event in the house today. It's like, it's coming back.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been doing climate talks for over 20 years and been well aware of the catastrophe we're facing. And yet, I don't know, I think I have a pretty positive outlook. I mean, I think we're all going to die someday. And if you let that stop you from living life, then that's going to be a problem. But the other side of it is if you engage in fighting climate change or the poly crisis, it's very empowering. You feel like you're doing something really useful and exciting and like, well, yeah, what everyone else is doing is boring or something like that compared to what we're doing. So I always think that's can be a positive.
Yeah, it is. It can be very healing. It's not for everyone. Some people, they only want to fight a battle that they know they're going to win. And I always explain to my readers, I know that this is a very difficult battle, but I'm not fighting it because we're not fighting it because we want to win it. We're fighting it out of principle. And because selfishly, it does make us feel alive.
Mhm. And kind of on that subject in a way is you end the book on the subject of rebirth, and you talk a lot about plants and things like that. That's your background expertise, but maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what you mean by rebirth for us, for humans as a species, like what happens and then what can come after that. How can we be reborn?
Like in the same way we've always been reborn. I mean, collapse is something that has happened to our civilizations dozens of times. I believe there's more than like 80 or something well documented spectacular civilizational collapse events.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens after that is very simply people pick up the pieces and they learn some things and they forget some other learnings. So, going back to the sort of original thesis of collapse being an inevitable but also a cyclical phenomenon, you go through the trough of collapse and then you reach the peak of civilization again. And I'm sorry to say, but there's another trough coming after that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you never really escape collapse ever. There's no like forever unless you change as a species. And again, my argument regarding overshoot, which I consider a sort of not just a physical and climate phenomenon, but a cognitive phenomenon, is something that we are wired for. We are wired for many forms of self-destruction. Just this afternoon, walking along the beach, I saw half of the people were smoking.
Right.
And they were even in their 60s and 70s. This is a bit of a retirement community where I live. So this is a lot of the demographic. And so these are people that are actually very close to their death and they're still smoking because they're just following the kind of YOLO, you only live once kind of thing. And,
Right.
try to
also addiction,
size that up.
Very strong addiction for that, right? There's
Yeah.
physical connections. Yeah. Okay. Well, by the way, so we talked about your book, and by the way, let me pop it up here again. And there is a link to your personal website in the show notes, so everyone can go there and can find the book. But you also, this is just one of the many things that you are working on. Tell us a little bit about what your current writing is about. Like what are some of the areas you're focused on right now?
I focus on my latest piece, the one that I wrote yesterday, actually, is a good example of where my writing is taking me as I explore things that I sometimes explore before. So I didn't know I was a systems thinker, but apparently I'm a systems thinker. So whether it's a biological or an economic or a cognitive system, this is what really interests me, how these civilizations have commonalities and differences. So I am at the moment following in the steps of the book I've just written. So I'm actually following on the biological dimensions of collapse. But I wouldn't be surprised if I wrote another novella on cli-fi, or I did a memoir, or everything. Who knows? Maybe something on grief. I don't know.
Okay. By the way, yes, I'm formerly a systems engineer, and I've actually done some programs here on systems thinking and climate change, and that is a very useful way to look at the problem. And in your book, you're kind of doing that really by stepping back and looking at the whole thing, not just looking at individual pieces. And that's what system thinking is all about. And we're going to bring on Leon Simons, who you met at the conference, the adaptation conference. And let's bring Leon on. Hey, Leon, welcome.
Hi there. Hi, George. Great to have you. Yeah, we met, when was it? End of last year? Oh, no, start of this year. April, yeah. A lot has happened since. In Budapest was really a great meeting for 4 days with a lot of people who care about these subjects a lot. Yeah, maybe you could talk a bit about what you learned from that conference and what you brought back, and about to me it was I took away a lot, and I would like to hear your thoughts.
The World Adaptation Forum is a one of a kind. It really brings together people from a wide range of disciplines, from the sciences, from the social sciences, people that are working in government, people are working in charities, people like me who are just polycrisis authors, working from their bedroom, and essentially bringing together thinkers around the theme of collapse, which I guess sounds serious and almost kind of, I think, perhaps to the outsider, they think of us as doomers because we went to this conference that was about collapse, and that's not the case. Actually, it's I thought it was excellent. I think it's the most forward thinking collection of individuals who look at the polycrisis from all the necessary angles and are able to do this sort of 360 that you don't get from other conferences. That, as Dan, you were saying, that they look at the different bits without looking at the full beast, which for me is biology. For other people, it is physics, or the solar system, or then this is great to get all these perspectives.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you refer to doomers, and I think it was a very rational group of people. Almost everyone I met there was very rational, and I think you have this strawman version of the word doomer, where people talk about, say, this like stereotypical person, which doesn't. I haven't never met this person, right? Who thinks there's nothing we can do and we shouldn't do anything because everything's going to end anyways. And like at the World Adaptation Forum, there's a very rational conversation about what collapse means, what the risks are which we are facing, and also what's already inevitable, right? So yeah, maybe you can talk a bit about what your thoughts are on what a doomer is and what a doomer is not. I think that would be interesting.
Well, a doomer is a label that was applied from climate skeptics to our community of collapse realists. So it's as it happens with many activism movements, I think that the segment that I represent, which is realists, we adopted that term in order to kind of clean it up. So at some point, there's quite a few of us that proudly call themselves doomers. I don't like to do that anymore. I mean, all these are labels, but essentially a doomer, if you want to use that word, is a realist, is a straight talker that talks through the climate science facts without sugarcoating things or trying to use complicated language that essentially takes out the significance of what they're saying. And you see this all the time when you look at some of the journalists or other personalities, the sort of language that they use to describe the heat waves, while a video is playing of people as usual jumping in municipal fountains. So it's like, oh, it's so great, it's a party. That's what it is. It's again, the World Adaptation Forum is a straight talking group of experts who sometimes are even putting their reputation on the line to be able to clearly say the things that they're saying.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and although I think a doomer, I would classify a doomer as someone who says there's nothing we can do about it. That it's all really bad and explains all that, and there's nothing we can do about it. And even in your book and even in our discussion today, I mean, I think you've highlighted a few things that we can do. Now, that doesn't mean we don't we avoid collapse forever, because it's a natural part, but it might be something that we can put off for quite a while. I don't know.
I think having less than 4 billion people die would be a great start.
That would be a good goal. Yeah. Although actually, population is going to be dropping just because of choice, right? It's not going to get as high as we once thought, because people are having less babies now, and below population. Yeah. And now they're making that the crisis, that we're below.
Yeah, but what's funny about this? I think that the predictions are behind what will actually happen in a way that's inverse to the climate science. So the climate science, how the climate science is always behind the actual scenario. So it's always more rosy in the predictions. And then we always say, oh, it's actually worse than we thought. Well, I think that with population, it's going to be even better than we thought. So the population will crash even faster.
Okay.
And of course, there's a lot of economic and social complications coming with that. But for the planet as a whole, I think there will be some huge advantages.
Okay. Hey, Leon, I think we'll bring Stacy in now. And Stacy, hi there. I think your mic is scratchy or something going on.
Oh, is that me?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
George, thanks for being here. Good to see you, Leon and Dan. Took my question, Leon, with the doomer conversation. But that's okay. There's lots more. Well, the one thing I wanted to clear up, you said very early on something about we're the only species without a predator. I think we probably take a good shot at being predator and prey ourselves. We're a very vicious species for sure. there's been lots of chatter on the channel. Well, first, a lot of love for you. That's very clear. But on political systems, and we were saying about how China is actually succeeding in this area. Is there a political system that might be more inherently inclined to tackle climate change than others?
You're probing into my political views, and I won't hide it. I openly say to people I'm an eco-anarchist because I don't believe in government. I believe that government was created to control people in the same way as religion and extraterrestrial cults. But because we have huge societies and they need to be managed, quote unquote, I do believe in local initiatives and smaller local governments that emulate the way that our early civilizations worked, which was, I think there's like a magic number of 100 or 300 people that is the ideal way for a community to be able to collaborate, to communicate, to work together, and also where you have transparency and where you know where your mayor lives. That is a great incentive for the mayor to do a good job when everyone knows where their door is. And we live in a society where our leaders are cooped up in glass towers. So, I don't have it's not communism or capitalism or this. To me, it's more about size and accessibility of the people to power.
Okay. Hey, let's go to Leon here, and then Stacey will come back and we'll get some of those questions from
Eli?
Oh, Eli. What did I say? Leon.
Leon.
Okay, Eli.
That's okay.
Yeah, here we go. Eli, welcome, Eli.
Hi, thanks, Dan. Hi, everybody. So carbon dioxide removal and sunlight reflection methods, also known as geoengineering, also known as SRM, will, if we implement them, reduce the most dangerous impacts of climate change. Do you think these approaches, if implemented at scale, could give ecological rebound a chance, or just give us a little more runway, or do you think they would backfire, or something else? What's your take?
Thanks for the question. I think, well, I'm not a huge fan of carbon capture, actually. I mean, it takes tremendous infrastructure just for getting a few tons of CO2 embedded in a rock. And funnily enough, they're implementing that here in my region. They're embarking on a huge carbon capture project, and I'm not a fan of that. However, on the on SRM, is it called, or the reflective sort of, I've always been enthusiastic about that because it is just extremely simple. You just reflect all that energy back into space, and mirrors are cheap. They're not I guess the carbon cost of their manufacture perhaps is, it can't be as much as creating a unit of carbon capture where you have to be pumping that carbon down into bedrock. So I think that might actually be the technology I'm most positive about, just because it is in my mind perhaps the least intrusive to the environment.
Although we've done shows, by the way, mirrors are just one way, and we did a show on that with a group called mirror.org, which focuses on reflectivity on the surface of the Earth. But you'd need literally mirrors the size of the United States total to actually reflect enough sunlight. I think most of the work now is on what's called SAI, stratospheric aerosol injection, where we take this pollution and we're sticking where we breathe, and instead of cut it back a lot and put it back up in the stratosphere where we don't breathe it and last much longer. and reflecting the sun that way. Have you, looked into that one as well, or not much?
So are you referring to the recreating the masking of the aerosol?
It's aerosol masking, but in the stratosphere, where you need far less.
Stratosphere. Yeah,
because-
no, I wasn't aware of it.
Okay.
That's kind of
It's what happens when a big
approaching
volcano goes off.
geoengineering sort of region for me, and I'm not very fond of geoengineering, just because.
Well, that's what we're doing.
Leon is going to laugh now, because it reminds me of Leon and I were in this panel at the World Adaptation Forum, and we talked about, I think, geoengineering or other things, and we were at some point in the conversation in this panel, we were talking about all these different technologies, and how, going back to our conversation about how technology, the point that I always make about technology is that we get some benefits, but we also get some hangovers from technologies. So they solve problems, but they also introduce new problems that we've never had before. And geoengineering is the climate solution that has probably the most potential of creating problems that we won't be able to backtrack from. Once you pump things into the atmosphere, can you take them back?
No, they fall
If
out. Yeah.
if it's not working, or if it's making things worse, or if it's, I don't know, killing a whale, or
So depending on the type, like the stratospheric sulfate aerosols, that rains out in 6 months. So
The
say
danger
there
is
was
you
a say there was
stop.
say there was a volcano, adding more, well, that would be a famine if we kept doing it, but we back off, and we just get what the volcano did. But the other thing I just need to mention, SRM is great, and it's probably the most leverage that we can get in my opinion, but it's definitely not a complete solution, because so long as carbon dioxide remains elevated in the atmosphere, we still have ocean acidification, which I'm sure, as you appreciate, is an ecological catastrophe all by itself.
Yeah.
And I just want to throw in my 2 cents in this conversation. Again, I would prefer not to have any of this conversation discussing technologies. I would prefer that we were not even in this place to begin with. If we had enough forest cover left on Earth, that would be able to decrease our level of CO2 naturally. That would happen. But we can't have that anymore, obviously, because our cities and civilization occupy, I think, something as much as like 1/3 of the actual land surface.
No, meat
Earth.
production. Meat production.
Yeah,
is
used
1/3
for-
of non-ice covered land. But even so, trees are temporary stores of CO2. They're not permanent, right? They die from drought and flood and heat stress and bark beetle and a million other things. So, but that's a whole other subject. We've done many programs on that, but I want to focus on the areas that you're writing about. And with that, first of all, let me remind everyone to like and subscribe and the program. And Stacey, do you have some of the?
I
questions?
do, and just to tag on to what you were talking about there. You were talking earlier about the amount of land needed per person for food, and that rate will shrink if we would go to plant-based diets, because so much of the land that is used for farming, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and they farm fields all around growing corn. None of
and
it.
fuel.
Yeah, right. It's
Ethanol.
not for us to eat. It's not food for humans. It is feed for stock and being turned into fuel, which is so highly inefficient. So that's something we could tackle. One question I have here, 1044. Do you think the human race will suffer the same fate that all species suffer when the population increases beyond the carrying capacity of its habitat?
Interesting question, because if we followed the fate of other species, I think we would have collapsed already. The ingenious thing about humans is that every time they're about to collapse, they invent some technology that manages to sort of save them, quote unquote. I'm saying quote unquote because, none of us are happier than the previous generation or the generations before us. Well, we will never know the level of aliveness and happiness that our ancestors had. They lived such rich lives. We are steeped in technology that we had to adopt in order to have 8 billion of us on this planet. So I would say the jury is out on that one. What concerns me is that if more of us were to, if we were able to avoid, let's say, a population collapse, it would almost definitely result with a concurrent worsening of the ecological collapse. So is this a sort of planet that we want to have of, 15, 20, 35 billion humans and literally nothing else on the planet? And is that even possible? I guess it is possible if we all eat, I don't know, synthetic lentils, or it's really, it's a sad thing to, I think, contemplate.
Okay. Hey, Stacey, I'm going to put a question here because
Sure.
Does George lecture, travel, or lead a book club? How does he connect with the community? I ask because I'm interested in learning more. So here's your chance to tell us how people can learn more about what you're up to and what you write about. I know you have a Substack. Again, link to your homepage is in the video description.
I post on Substack quite often. So my articles go up usually about twice a week, sometimes more often than that, less often than that. I also have my own webpage, tsakraklides.com, but it's essentially the same content. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm still on Twitter because my followers begged me to stay on Twitter. So I post actually a lot of memes, funnily enough, and little sort of wisdoms and insights for the day. So if you follow me on the social media, you might enjoy that experience as much as social media is so frivolous and toxic.
Yeah. And I'll throw in this one here. Switching subjects, what kind of political system do you think is best, since some in the chat have advocated for communism and socialism as an alternative to democracy? What path do you see would help, prevent collapse as best possible? What kind of political system?
I think this is a little similar to the previous.
That's what I asked.
Yeah.
I would say it's fine. It's fine to answer it again. I'm not a fan of organized power, because I believe that all power, by definition, eventually becomes corrupted. So the best way to avoid that, to minimize the level of corruption, is to have small autonomous communities. And I think bioregionalism is a very important concept that was introduced actually at the World Adaptation Forum. And that refers to the organization of humans, not based on nationality or language, but based on actual bioregional boundaries, the way that Earth is structured in terms of, for example, catchment areas of rivers, areas that are self-sufficient and present ecological sort of boundaries, which is a more natural and an economically more viable way to organize society. I like that perspective, not necessarily as a reality, but as a conversation piece that we can borrow a lot of things from in terms of how we think about our societies, and the ridiculous state of humanity being one species but 180 whatever countries. I mean, what is that? What species does that?
Yeah.
So we end up fighting for resources and river estuaries and all of that exactly because we're the only species that developed the concept of ownership in legal terms. So, you know, other species have their territories, but we actually tried to legalize it and to turn it into entitlements, which is really another level.
Okay.
There's one here I have to ask on. So there was conversation about you can fix what you don't measure, and even though the source of it is a prickly person in the chat, I do recognize it's very hard to improve what you don't measure, so you can track how it's going. But then it turned to valuation. So in terms of what is your thoughts on biodiversity valuation and climate financing?
Biodiversity valuation and climate
Putting economic
finance.
value on biodiversity is what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'm a huge fan of that. I think a lot of my writing actually tries to bridge the area between Earth's economic system, what I call the Bank of Earth, which is where we all get our bailouts from, and the human economic system, which is basically, let's face it, a parasitic economic system. And I know that makes people jittery because it's an emotional word, but snap out of it. We are a parasitic sort of entity because we depend on nature. And I think that assigning value, and assigning not only value, but assigning entitlement to, let's say, rivers and lakes in the way that we assign corporations, we make them entities with legal rights. The same thing should exist for all 10 million species. You know, when you look at any, you know, a seagull or a bird, that bird should have housing rights, rights to water. You know, the same way a human has rights to all of these things. Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
So
With
so
that,
now
by the way, go ahead.
I'll just say, hearing that, I'll say hi to Elliot, and I guess that you two must be friends.
You know Elliot Jacobson, who's one of our most popular shows on about a doomer, or discussion with a doomer. So,
Hi, Elliot.
yeah, but okay. So, by the way, I enjoyed your book, and I think that if people enjoy this discussion and enjoyed what you were saying, definitely should read the book because it's well written and it goes into a far more detail than we were able to do today. And again, not sugarcoating anything, just saying directly what you think, and that's always very, very refreshing. So thank you for that, and also thank you for joining us on Climate Chat today and sharing your knowledge and your thoughts on this obviously incredibly important topic that gets really very little discussion outside of forums like this, which itself is a very interesting thing when you take one of the most important subjects in the world and no one wants to talk about it.
It's so niche.
But anyway, thank you again. And by the way, you can stay on here, but after we end, and we can get back to you in a second. Thanks everyone for joining. Again, please like and subscribe so that more people will have access to this. And we'll see you next time. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.